Hi everyone, in this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at a game played between Judit Polgar and Garry Kasparov. This was played in the 2002 Russia versus the rest of the world, and this was played in Moscow, Russia. And without further ado, let's look at this game. Polgar starts by playing e4, and we have e5 by Kasparov. Knight f3, knight c6, and now bishop b5, the Roy Lopez. Knight f6, castles, and now knight takes e4. And here, Polgar plays the move d4, and this will go into the Berlin endgame, and this was actually used by Vladimir Kramnik to play against Garry Kasparov in the 2000 World Championship, and now Kasparov is using it 2 years later to play against Polgar. Knight d6 by Kasparov, and this is obviously trying to attack the bishop on b5, but Polgar plays bishop c6, Kasparov takes with the d-pawn, and now d-e5. Knight f5, and we have a trade of queens. And here, Polgar develops with knight c3, and this is all standard theory. It's been played many times. h6 by Kasparov, and rook d1 check by Polgar. King e8, and now h3. Bishop e7. Kasparov cannot castle, so he might as well just develop his pieces. Knight e2, and now knight h4. Offering a trade of knights, and Polgar accepts. Knight h4, bishop h4, and bishop e3. So bishop f5, Kasparov develops his other bishop. Knight d4 by Polgar, attacking the bishop on f5 and also defending the pawn on c3. Bishop h7 and now g4. And here bishop e7, retreating the bishop and trying to get somewhat of a more centralized bishop, maybe on the c5 square. King g2 by white, and now h5. Kasparov tries to open the position this way, and knight f5 by Polgar. Bishop to f8. Defending the g7 pawn. And somehow, Polgar managed to make Kasparov's two bishops look completely useless on the h7 and f8 squares. The h7 bishop could be argued that it is kind of useful, but the f8 bishop is definitely not doing much on f8. King f3, Polgar tries to activate the king, bishop g6, rook d2, a trade on g4, and now rook h3 check. The king comes to g2, and now rook h7. Kasparov doesn't really know what to do, but for the moment he's just going to try controlling the h-file. King g3, and now f6. We have bishop f4. You could capture on f6, and this would technically allow a very weak pawn for Kasparov, but after g takes f6, bishop takes f5 would try to isolate the pawn for Polgar. Bishop f4. Bishop f5, g f5, fe5, and now rook e1. You can always capture the pawn a bit later, so that is what Polgar is doing. Bishop d6, captures on e5, and now king d7. c4, threatening the move c5, which would win material, so c5, bishop d6, cd6, and rook e6. And even though Polgar has the same amount of material as Kasparov, she is completely better. Why? Because she's going to win this d6 pawn, and there's nothing that Kasparov can really do to prevent this. So, rook ah8, doubling the rooks on the h-file and perhaps trying to maybe create some sort of a mating net. Rook e takes d6 check, king c8, and now rook 2 to d5. Threatening the c5 pawn, but first Kasparov gives a couple of checks. Check on h3, and now check on h2, and Polgar tries to run with her king, and now b6. You might be wondering why not continue checking. Well, this would actually just allow the move f4, and there's now a defense towards all of these checks. And now maybe it is even Polgar who is threatening somewhat of a mating attack. So instead, we have b6 by Kasparov, but rook c6 check. And king to b8. King to b7 would allow the move rook g6, and after rook d7 check, there's no way to defend this g7 pawn. So that would just be too bad for Kasparov. So he plays king b8, and after rook d7, rook h2. He abandons the g7 pawn, but Polgar doesn't take it. Instead, she plays the move king e3, and after rook f8, plays rook c7. And the idea is you don't necessarily want the rooks to capture all the pawns. You just want them to control the king on b8 from leaving the 8th rank. So rook f5, and now check on b7, king c8, rook dc7 check, king d8, and now rook takes g7. And here, Polgar is way better. She is going to win this a7 pawn next, and Kasparov is completely helpless. So he plays king c8, and actually after this move was played, he also decided to resign the game, because there's no way to defend the loss of all the pawns, and with that, there's no way to defend against checkmate threats. We noticed that once these rooks are both on the 7th rank, there are checkmate threats towards the black king, and black doesn't really have a good defense against all of those threats, and that is also why black cannot really continue on the game for any longer. That is why after king c8 was played, Kasparov resigned the game, and a very, very nice victory for Judit Polgar. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.